Welcome to That's What She Pled, with attorneys Christina Goldberg and Julie Lurson from Lurson Goldberg LLC, law powered by women. It's time to shake up the old standards of law and of business. Join these two witty, intelligent, and sassy female business owners who are taking their industry by storm, challenging stereotypes and shattering ceilings. These two are on a mission to educate, empower, and support not only their own clients, but other powerhouse female entrepreneurs. Come for a laugh and stay for the vibe as Julie and Christina hold nothing back and share the truth of what it is to be female attorneys and business owners through discussion of current events, original stories, and inspiring guests. Now, on to the show.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. This is attorney Christina Goldberg. I am here with my law partner, Julie Lurson. I keep trying to look at my camera, but I don't have to do that. So this will be fun. No more multitasking. That's what she pled. So we are here on this bright, beautiful, wonderful Tuesday.
In March.
And March just so happens to be Women's History Month. So we thought that we might take this opportunity to have, of course, another really badass female businesswoman on with us, and we'll introduce her in just a little bit. We thought we would take the opportunity just to kind of take a deeper dive into some of the progress of women over time, particularly our place in the workforce.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in with our guest, so a little hint. But as always, I like to give a little perspective. So let me just jump right in and let's just hit on some of the highlights of women in the United States in particular. And we'll start out with what things were like back in the 19th century and before, when women were chattel. That's a fancy legal term.
It is. I like that word.
I know. Chattel. That's the French pronunciation.
Is that?
Honestly, when I was in law school, I dated this guy for a long time. And one of the first things he said to me, and it was first year, we were 1Ls and we were in property law, and he called me chattel. And I was offended then, just as everyone should be now, because what chattel means is that we're property. And unfortunately, that was true. Basically, women didn't exist apart from their husbands. Mm-hmm. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own property. They couldn't file a lawsuit. They couldn't do squat. We were sort of second-class citizens. And fortunately, that started to change during the 19th century, so that by the turn of the 20th century, most, or maybe all states had passed these laws called the Married Women's Property Act, which allowed them to do such things as own property in their name.
Gasp.
Wow.
Own their own property.
Keep their own wages if they happen to be working outside of the home. And then, of course, by 1920, the 19th Amendment passed, which gave us all the right to vote. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, women were, I guess, increasingly present in the workforce, at least for a while. And so within the Department of Labor, they created a specific women's bureau to sort of focus and track all things having to do with women in the workforce. And when I was looking through some of that information, they sort of tracked the top 10 types of professions that women typically worked in over the decades. So like from 1920 to 2020. Mm-hmm. And sort of the overwhelming observation is not much has changed, which isn't to denigrate any of these professions and at all. But women tend to work in very sort of traditionally women's kinds of positions. So secretaries, teachers, nurses, domestic workers, waitresses, cooks, caregiving type tasks. And obviously, if you weren't in the official workforce, you were probably doing that kind of thing around the household. Okay.
Well, thankfully, as the number of women in the workforce has grown over the last 100 or so years, the overall percentage of women in these sort of more stereotypically female professions has dropped from about 53% to 32%. So women are starting to get more involved in entrepreneurial positions. And I know that I don't have a site for this, but Julia, I'm positive that we actually have more female law school Juris Doctorate candidates than male at this point.
I do think the balance is tipped in favor of women. You're right. And I think that's probably also carries over to other sort of professional degrees, medical doctors, that sort of thing as well. So yeah, we're making progress. We've seen a 20% shift over the last 100 years. Think where we'll be in another 100, right?
There you go.
I mean, so yes, the positive, sort of view of all this is we're making progress. We've come a long way, baby. And let me just as an aside, talk about when I was a kid in the 1970s, there was this cigarette marketing campaign specifically directed at women to try to get them to smoke Virginia Slims. And their tagline was, "You've come a long way, baby." Anyway, like I said, I digress. It's kind of, the 70s, equal rights and all that. So I guess it was sort of an empowering idea, but looking back in hindsight, it just kind of feels nasty.
Poorly executed. Poorly executed. Oh my god.
Anyway, women are making progress, although we still have there's still a hill to climb. And this is sort of where we bring in our guest today.
Yes, we have actually a really cool attorney with us in Texas. So we have Margo Pillischer. The spelling on that last name threw us for a minute, but we got it. And Margo is a super lawyer, a peer recognition status, which is a really cool status to get. She's a magna cum laude undergrad of Tulane, with top honors as a Spanish major. That's pretty cool. And just spent some time interning at the White House. That's no big deal, really.
Yeah, she's got some bona fides. And she's a lawyer. And, we know everything from Texas is bigger. So, Margo, you were a natural selection. Bigger because you're a badass in your own right and you're empowered and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, we were actually lucky enough to be connected to you through a contact, Peyton Tax. We've been working with Peyton for quite some time, trying to sort of do the advertising thing, become a little more known here in Florida, obviously, certainly not in Texas. But Peyton said, my gosh, we're all pretty strong, kick-ass women. And I know a strong, kick-ass woman that you should talk to. And Margo, you tell us a little bit about your background. What do you do? Where you're from? Kind of just a snapshot of you.
Sure. Well, thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. I've been listening to the podcast to kind of gear up for today, and I'm a fan. Yeah. So like you said, I'm in Austin. I was actually born and raised here in Austin, and kind of moved around a lot in my, young adult life. I was in New Orleans for undergrad, which actually my first year was Hurricane Katrina. And so
There you go.
Ended up my first semester in college back in Austin, and then bounced back to Tulane, graduated from there. And then actually did a little over a year in Madrid, Spain, where I taught English before moving to New York City for law school. And I went to law school, graduated there in New York, and that's where I started my legal career. And I was in New York for about 10 years, and then moved back to my hometown about 3 years ago, and have been, raising my family here, working as an attorney, and this is where we've settled, and very happy to be back around family.
Right. Full circle. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Yes.
And just, I guess, as backdrop, Christy knew she wanted to be a lawyer when she was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And Julie took this sort of long path, careful path. What's your path to becoming a lawyer? Did you always know you wanted to be a lawyer, or?
The seed was there. My dad is a lawyer. I actually
okay.
work with my dad now. He's the Ross in our law firm.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So, he actually his law school career was his second career. And so he went back to law school when I was already, a young child, but I have, vivid memories of him practicing for the LSAT and throwing me questions at 5 years old. And, so
and you still wanted to go.
And you still wanted to.
So, I started negotiating at a very young age and really couldn't shake it. But, like you guys mentioned earlier, I did study Spanish in college, and that is another passion of mine, just the language. And so I was, I knew law school was most likely on the horizon for me, but I kind of wanted to explore in college and a little bit after that, whether maybe I was going to pursue, a PhD or something in that vein with Spanish. But ultimately, I thought law school was going to be, even if I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to practice, I knew that it was a good degree to get and a good education to have, and fell in love with it when I was actually in law school. And I'm very happy with how it kind of shaked out.
So
shook out.
you practiced for 10 years in New York, which means you took the New York bar. And
That's
I know
true.
you're Texas licensed, and I happen to know you also have your New Jersey license. So my question is, did you have to sit for 3 bar exams, or did you get
I sat
reciprocity?
for 2 bar exams. I did New York and New Jersey together. And a lot of people in New York do that.
I'm sure.
Because you can just add on the New Jersey. Well, now it's different. They have the uniform bar exam, but when I took the bar, that wasn't around yet. And actually, I don't know if New York or New Jersey participates, but anyway, it was the main part of, the multi-state exam was one day, the New York bar was the second day, and then people who added on the New Jersey bar took that on the third day. And so that's what I did. And when in New York and in Texas, if you have worked for at least 5 years in another approved jurisdiction, one of which is New York, then you can waive into the Texas bar. And that's what I did.
Very nice. Yeah.
Yes.
I moved to Florida, and I'd been out of law school for 10 years as well, but Florida doesn't have reciprocity with anybody. So
Yep.
I got to sit for a second bar exam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Florida
was
says
like-
we're full. We're not just handing it to anybody, but yeah, that works
You know,
both ways.
My husband is a lawyer also, and he and I, we knew we were going to move down to Texas, and we planned our move so that we had the requisite 5 years of practice
I'm sure.
in New York before we got down here, because you guys all
once
know.
is enough. Yeah,
Exactly.
you're smart.
Yeah. Well, so how did you talk about the White House a little bit? What were you doing interning at the White House? How'd you get there?
Yeah, that was my junior year of undergrad. I double majored in Spanish and political science, so that was more of the political science track. But one time I think I saw an email in my at my tulane.edu email, and it was talking about possible internships for the next year, and one of them was the White House internship, and I said that would be a very unique experience and really cool. So I applied for it and was lucky enough to be selected. And that was the fall semester of my junior year. And I interned actually in the personnel office, which is sort of like HR, for the semester. And, just met a ton of people, got to live in a very cool city that I had never really spent any time in prior to that. And, learned a lot. And it was something that is, I'm still talking about many years later.
Yeah.
A very, very cool experience.
So was that did that play a role at all in your decision to, I know the other piece that I don't know if we've hit on yet is you're an employment law lawyer. You represent employees predominantly, I assume.
Yes, I do.
I don't know whether you're being part of the personnel branch or department or whatever it is at the White House was at all part of your interest was piqued. I'm not being very articulate here. Excuse me.
No, I know where you're going, and I wish I could say that it was, because wouldn't that be a nice
Full
story?
circle,
right?
Yeah. Full circle. But no, that was just sort of a circumstantial placement, and that's just happened to be where I was placed. I think, it played to a lot of my strengths, which is I like to talk to people. I like to be a little nosy, I guess. And that actually, that I feel like HR, that was something that I was able to do. You get to know a lot, but actually that's something that I really enjoy about employment law. I really enjoy hearing what happens to people in their workplaces, because it's a very unique position to be in, where otherwise you wouldn't, you wouldn't be hearing these things that go on. And that's, not even to mention helping, people who are discriminated against and retaliated against make themselves whole. And that's obviously the main part of it. And that's, I think as lawyers, we all strive to do that, but particularly in employment law, I find that, yeah, it does speak to my eye for detail and my ability to, question people a lot about the different details of what's going on.
Tell us sort of we want to get into the cases that you commonly handle, but just so, again, you're in Texas and the
Right.
laws, the employment laws are, I don't know what they are. They may very well be different from what we have in Florida. Florida, we're an at-will employment state. What's the kind of the status of employment laws? Do you have to have cause to terminate someone in Texas? Is it an at-will state?
Sure. Texas is an at-will state, absent any type of employment contract for a specific period of time. And, I tell my clients all the time, Texas law overwhelmingly favors the employer. The federal laws, are there to protect employees, and some states, California is one of them, New York is one of them, and there are others, significantly expand those protections for employees. Unfortunately, I practice in a state where the state has not done that, right? So there's nothing, there are not any Texas law, well, with very few exceptions, there are not many Texas laws that expand significantly the rights of the employee in Texas. So we pretty much operate under the federal law. And I will say that recently, and I believe it was September 2021, the Texas law was amended to regarding sexual harassment, where ordinarily an employer needs to have 15 or more employees in order for these anti-discrimination laws to apply to them. But the Texas legislature changed the sexual harassment law in Texas, where there is no minimum number of employees now to bring, for an employee to bring a sexual harassment claim here in Texas. So that is
Okay.
That's
So that
progress.
was
Yeah,
a very
that's a
good,
win.
very good law. Yeah, for sure. And there were a couple of other changes that that law put into effect, but that was the major one. It makes it easier for women who have been sexually harassed in Texas to bring a claim.
So just maybe for the sake of people who aren't as conversant in employment law, the opposite of at will, and I feel like that this also, there's a sort of a geographical divide, like perhaps north of the Mason-Dixon line, you find less situations where there's at will employment as opposed to south.
What I tell my clients when I'm doing an intake, or any potential client is, your company can fire you for any reason, be it a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all. And, that's sometimes a surprise to callers that we have, to potential clients that we have, and the other important thing to note, speaking to, how difficult it can be for an employee in Texas to bring a claim, is that the employment laws that cover anti-discrimination and anti-retaliation in the workplace are extremely specific and extremely narrow. And the facts have to be in a very specific pattern to have a claim. And there's a lot of defenses that are available to the employer that will help them evade liability. And, I think a lot of people, besides being generally uninformed about their rights in the workplace, are surprised to hear that, it is legal for your boss to yell at you and bully you. I mean, those are a lot of people call us and say, that's what they're experiencing. But unless it's based on your belonging in a protected class, which are generally age, race, disability, gender identity, there are a few others. Those are the ones I'm thinking of off the top of my head. Of course, sex-based discrimination as well. But unless that bullying or that harassment is based on the employees belonging into one of those classes, the law doesn't cover that. The law doesn't protect them.
And it can be a slippery slope, I think, right? Like this. So you can make an argument on either side. I like to devil's advocate things. Sometimes you can make an argument on either side, what's going to prevent someone from going to work, doing something wrong, being yelled at, and then getting fired and being angry at that and filing suit. On the other hand, if you're really going to an absolutely abusive environment every single day, well, you do have, as the employee, you have the right to change that environment for yourself. So it's sort of like, where's the balance between being accountable for one's own decisions to put yourself in that scenario, but also holding an employer accountable for, well, now what do I do? I'm miserable. And where do I go? It's kind of a tough balance, but it's certainly, Texas is right on board with Florida. Yeah. I mean, it's, and that's not surprising with the way things are right now, certainly, at least politically and our legislatures and such. But so what are some of the cases that what do you see most?
We see a lot of claims that have to do with every protected class. I would say we get a lot of disability related calls. So that's the Americans with Disabilities Act. We get a lot of race-based calls, which is Title VII, which protects members of protected classes, including race. A lot of age, which there's the Age Discrimination and Employment Act and the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which protect workers over 40 and older.
Yeah, people 40 is old.
And then we get a lot of sex-based discriminations. That includes sexual harassment. It includes discrimination based on the fact that somebody is a woman. And that there's other laws that cover things, related to employment, such as compensation. So the Equal Pay Act is something that, I like to focus on. But yeah, I mean, I think I've lately, especially, been getting a lot more calls about people with disability, and definitely race discrimination as well.
Hey, sorry for the interruption. I know you're listening to the That's What She Pled podcast, and I am so happy you're here. If you have any questions, please head over to lawpoweredbywomen.com or look in the show notes to find out how to reach us. We would love to hear from you. How do you go about, I mean, if you can tell us or are willing to tell us, so how would you actually go about it? It's really easy, right, to make a claim. Hey, I didn't get hired for this job because, or I was fired from this job because. What process do you actually take to show that?
Sure. Well, a lot of it, like I was saying earlier, is it's really fact heavy, and something I enjoy about employment law is I get to learn a lot about different industries, right? I've had clients in the restaurant industry or in media, or, just a lot in technology, especially here in Austin. There's a lot of tech companies here. And so it's really about understanding the business that my client is or was in, so that you can understand sort of or anticipate the arguments that the business is going to make for themselves, because there's a lot of, at different points, there are a lot of defenses that they have that are based on whether their decision was reasonable to the business, or whether it was, not discriminatory because of different things that they might say about their business judgment. But so like I said, it's a lot about learning the business of the client, and we look at discrimination and then retaliation. So a piece of advice that I always give to clients is, if you feel like you are being discriminated against based on your belonging to a protected class, go ahead and make a complaint. A lot of people will call us before they've made a complaint to their company, to HR, to a manager, or someone higher up, because they're afraid of retaliation. But what the truth is that once you've made that complaint, that actually puts you into a separate protected class of somebody who has complained of discrimination, and that the law protects you from being retaliated against. And so that's the piece of advice I always give. And then interestingly, whether or not the discrimination complained of ends up being found to actually have been discrimination, that the fact that you made a good faith complaint of discrimination will protect you from retaliation as somebody who believed that they were being discriminated against, whether or not the court ultimately determines that the discrimination occurred or not, or I should say the jury.
But that was going to be my question, is typically your jury trials, if you're going to go to trial?
Yes. Well, so something I haven't mentioned at all is the EEOC, and that is of course, the administrative body that oversees these anti-discrimination laws, and that's an absolute prerequisite for bringing a lawsuit under any of these laws that I've mentioned. So you have to file an EEOC charge and go through their process and receive a right to sue letter at the end of their process before you're ever able to go, to a courtroom and have your day there. So, the majority of my practice is actually before the litigation stage, because we are often able to negotiate settlements during that EEOC process, whether it be through mediation or through just negotiation by the parties. And that's sort of the state of employment law as it is now. But yes, generally, if there are some cases, a portion of our cases which are litigated, and yes, we are doing that. We're demanding jury trials, and oftentimes, however, the employer will have the client, by the time they get to be our client, has already signed an arbitration agreement, and so we're either facing the arbitration, or we've got, or we will go the litigation route in court.
And just I guess maybe to get into more of a legal technicality, if you are a member of a protected class and you feel you've been discriminated against, in terms of defending those claims, I assume that there's a higher burden on you that you would have to overcome.
Sure. So once the claimant or the plaintiff, as it were, makes their prima facie case of discrimination, then the burden shifts to the employer to show that there was a non-discriminatory reason for their firing, their termination, right? Let me think of an easy example. Well, I'll do it without an example because I think it might take too long to think of a simple one. But at that point, then the burden will shift back to the plaintiff to show why the proffered reason by the business is pretextual.
Okay.
And so that's how it goes. And that is a burden shifting framework that we often see in these cases, because the business, of course, is not going to say, yep, that's why we fired you because you're a woman, right? They're going to say, oh no, we fired you because of your tardiness, and here's the 5 write-ups for tardiness that you've had. And
Right.
So that's why I say that the facts really play into it, and timelines of what happened can really play into it too. For example, in that scenario that I just said, well, it really depends on when this person made their complaint of discrimination, right? So if they made their complaint, hey, I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman, and then after that is when the write-up started, that's going to play in the plaintiff's favor, right? That's going to show, well, no, those write-ups were retaliatory because of her complaint of discrimination. Whereas if the same is, if she makes her complaint and then the business is actually able to show, hey, this tardiness problem and these write-ups started before she ever made her complaint, then that's pretty damaging to a claim of discrimination or retaliation, well, especially to retaliation.
I'm curious, you're a woman, you practiced for 10 years in New York. What about your own personal, just sort of the subtle differences in terms of maybe how men and women in the courtroom or before judges and that sort of thing? I don't know if you've had any experiences or observation, sort
Sure.
of the covert sorts of differences.
Well, I can definitely speak to, my experience in New York. And I just clarify, I lived in New York for 10 years. I practiced for 5.
Okay.
And then as soon as I had that 5 years,
You're out.
got back down to Texas. But, in what I was really lucky in New York, because that's where I started, my career, but I would go to court 5 days a week. I mean, it was the practice, and I practiced PI when I was there too. And I originally started in criminal defense and then did the PI for a little bit. But the model there is in PI, you're litigating everything. And so but in New York especially, there's all these conferences leading up to the trial, and those are all in court. Whereas in federal court and in Texas state court, more, there's fewer court appearances and fewer opportunities to actually go to court. But in New York, I was there daily, and I was fortunate enough to get courtroom experience, right? I tried cases and argued motions, et cetera. But I would say that, when you are physically in a courthouse and you're seeing all of the other attorneys that are arriving in the mornings every day, and you're waiting to be called for your motions, and you look around and, you're one of only, I don't know, a few women in a sea of, men, it can be, you notice that. And especially as a younger lawyer, when I first started, it was intimidating. I was, against men who had been doing this for 20 years. And I was, a couple of years into my career. And I think I got a lot of, I would say people tended to underestimate me. And I don't, it's hard to untie youth from, or inexperience from, the fact that I was a woman, but I also, had male colleagues who were also just a couple of years out of law school, and they were, not getting the kind of comments or the kind of behaviors that I would get. And, I had a boss she was my boss at my second job, which is the job that I started trying cases when I was there. And, she had come up in a generation where, before there were more women than men in law school, right? Like you were saying at the top of the show. And she took a particular interest in mentoring young women and young women lawyers and championing us and telling us, hey, I know I know it's unique to be a woman in this position, and I did it and you can too. And so she was very encouraging, gave me a lot of opportunities, and really taught me a model for what it's like to, support newer women lawyers. And that's something that I try to do, today.
Yeah, it's so important to have somebody,
Mentors.
mentors on your side. And it's funny because I mean, the same with me. And it's not even, luckily, I can't name a time that I have felt like employment wise, I have been treated differently as a woman than as my male counterparts, but certainly in the courtroom, by colleagues, by opposing counsel, there are absolutely times that I've been, I mean, comments, just filthy comments. If I go to a hearing and win and my male counterpart is pretty, I mean, I've handily handed his rear end to him. They don't like that. Nobody likes that. I don't like that when that happens to me either, but it's fascinating to go out in the hallway and grab an elevator and have this male attorney basically get on the elevator and say, the only reason you won is because your pants are too tight or your shirt's too low or because the judge found you attractive. No, actually, I think the reason that I won is because I prepared and I whooped your ass. But that's okay. You can tell yourself whatever you need to tell yourself to sleep at night. So it's that sort of thing. And that's really pervasive. I mean, that's among competition, even here locally. I mean, Julie and I both face it. You sort of come across a male colleague and, oh, how's business? It must be really hard being a woman. I'm sorry. I'm actually doing pretty well.
Things that are uttered that never probably cross your counterpart's mind if they were speaking to a male.
There's definitely a difference and an age factor in it, but I love it when people walk into a courtroom thinking, oh, this chick,
right?
This is fine. This
How
is
hard
easy.
Can this be?
Right.
Yeah.
That's the best. And I use
and
it
you
to my
outwork,
advantage.
outwit, out.
That's what I was going to say. You learn to outwork them. And that's the only thing that you can do to, to make sure that you're doing your best. And, if you do that, and I, especially, my first couple of trials, I was brand new. I had no idea what I was doing. And, I was up against these men who had been doing it for a long time. And my dad was helping me out, and I would talk to him about the cases and tell him, Dad, I don't know what I'm doing. And he would tell me, work hard, just prepare, be prepared. And that's all you can do. And it would surprise me time and time again. If I did that, I would be often successful. And the men who maybe looked at me and thought, hey, this will be easy to do, I don't need to work that hard, would be surprised. And so, that's kind of something I tell myself all the time is, as long as I'm doing everything that I need to do to be prepared, then, it's probably going to work out okay. And I can be proud of what I've done.
Absolutely. Yeah. What prior preparation prevents poor performance. There is nothing better than being prepared and knowing your case that intimately that when, you've got somebody else having to flip through and go, well, Your Honor, I'm not sure. Oh, I got it. Hang on. I'll step in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's on page 36, line 12.
Right. Exactly. I have it marked right
Your
here.
Honor. Yeah. Here's a copy for the court.
Yeah.
I think it's, the P to the fifth or whatever, prior preparation. I mean, it's gender immaterial. However, our life experiences have taught us that we tend to be underestimated. And I suppose, at least in my own experience, sometimes I unfortunately think that about myself. I think the good that comes out of that is I am going to be well prepared. I am going to work really hard. I'm not going to take my opponent for granted. And, in the end, hopefully the party with the better argument is the one who wins. And it has nothing to do with what we look like or our gender. Hey, let's segue to something a little lighter as we try to bring this in for a close. And let's just talk about, like, Margo, you work hard, plainly, and you are busy with work. And I know you have 3 kids and a family. So, like, what does Margo do for Margo, just for Margo. What do you do for fun or to relax?
Well, I actually have to think about that a minute.
Yeah, she said what?
I know. It's a hard one, isn't it? Surprisingly.
I do have 3 kids, and my youngest is a baby. She's 6 months. So I've been very busy the last period of time. But I really enjoy reading. I like to read like John Grisham novels. That's my kind of
guilty pleasure.
Yeah. And a lot kind of
Busman's Holiday.
Stuff like that. I like to cook. So I am always, I don't know if I can say that's just for me because I'm obviously cooking for my family, but I enjoy experimenting and reading about food, and I consume a lot of food media. So food podcasts and cooking podcasts, magazines as well. So that's a hobby of mine. Yeah. And I spend time with my kids. I mean, I know that sounds cliche, but it's, I don't see them during the week very often because they're at school and I'm working, and, it's busy in the mornings and the evenings. So those weekends when I can just relax with them is something I really am loving these days. And, they grow fast, and it's really
days
true.
are long and the years fly by. Exactly. So, right. Exactly. But it's good to have interests that are just yours. And I guess some of them benefit other people too.
For sure.
Because someday they will be, grown and flown, and, they'll have good roots. But if you've been totally immersed in work and family, then anyway.
Yeah, I try to maintain my reading hobby when I can, and definitely cooking as well. So I'm working on it.
Yeah. Well, Margo, it's been such a delight to have you join us today. If people
It's been so fun. Thank you.
Wanted to find you, how would they find you?
Well, go to our website. We've got rosslawgroup.com. You can hit me up on LinkedIn and or send me an email. I mean, I'm always down to chat. So
okay.
Awesome. And we'll just it's Margo, Margo, and your last name, Pillischer. So
it'll be in the show notes too, I think.
Yes, we'll have in the show notes.
LinkedIn, and that's where
we can find you on
website
LinkedIn
profile. So.
Yeah.
Perfect.
You've been so fun, Margo. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much.
And happy Women's History Month, everybody. Hopefully this has been a sober but enlightening and positive sort of experience.
Yeah. Well, then know your rights, right?
Exactly.
That's the important part. So this has been the That's What She Pled podcast. We are Christina and Julie. We are law powered by women. We are in Lakewood Ranch, Florida, and you can find us at www.lawpoweredbywomen.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can shoot us an email. You can find us on Instagram.
You can find us.
We can find us. Anyway, y'all have a great week, and we will talk to you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to That's What She Pled podcast. Don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Lursen Goldberg Lawyers. The content has been made available for general informational and educational purposes only and may not constitute the most up-to-date legal or other information. The content is not intended to be a substitute for legal advice from your individual attorney, and the information provided does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice.